I'm Adrienne Falk, 54, and I spent 30 years in the United States Navy, starting as an enlisted intelligence specialist before I earned my commission and, eventually, command of a joint task force. For decades, I let people underestimate me because I believed the work would always speak for me in the end. But when a captain grabbed my arm on my own operations floor and told me to get out of his sight, I had to decide what kind of officer and what kind of person I was going to be. Have you ever been dismissed on sight by someone who never once bothered to learn who you were? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand steady after someone tried to make you disappear, hit that like button and subscribe. The house I grew up in sat close enough to the water that you could hear the tide turn if you knew how to listen for it. My father knew how. He was a Navy chief, and he ran our little clapboard house the way he ran everything, with a quiet order that never needed to raise its voice. He taught me to read a tide table before I could ride a bike. He would put the folded chart in front of me at the kitchen table, tap it once with a finger that had a permanent callus from 30 years of line work, and wait. He never told me the answer. He waited until I found it, and when I did, he only nodded. That nod was worth more to me than any amount of praise from anyone else in the world. He had a sentence he used so often it wore a groove in me. "The ocean doesn't care how loud you are," he would say. "It only cares whether you did the work." I did not understand it as a child. I thought the loudest kids at school were the ones who won. I thought the boys who talked the most in class were the ones going somewhere, and the quiet ones like me were going to be left behind. It took me a long time and a long career to learn that my father had handed me the truest thing anyone ever gave me, and that I would spend decades proving it in rooms he would never see. We did not have much money. What we had was order and salt air, and a father who believed that a person's character was written in the small tasks they thought no one was watching. He checked how I coiled a rope. He checked whether I put the tools back the way I found them. He would run a thumb along the edge of a job I thought I had finished and find the one corner I had rushed, and he would not scold me. He would just look at me until I saw it too. I hated it as a girl. I understand now that he was building something in me that would hold weight for the rest of my life. He was teaching me that finishing is a moral act, that the last 10% of a job, the part nobody claps for, is the part that tells the truth about who you are. I was the older of two. My brother came 4 years after me, and from the beginning, we were built differently. He wanted the house full and the people close. He wanted Sunday dinners that never ended, and a sister who stayed within arm's reach. I wanted the quiet at the end of the dock at 5 a.m, the fog still sitting on the water, the feeling that if I paid close enough attention, I could understand how the whole machine of the tide fit together. Neither of us was wrong. We were just facing different directions, and the years would pull us further apart before they ever pulled us back. Leland felt every leaving as a small abandonment. When I went to summer programs, when I took the early bus, when I chose the dock over the dinner table, he kept a private ledger of it, and I did not know he was keeping it. I thought I was just being myself. I did not understand that to a little brother, a sister who is always looking at the horizon can feel like a sister who is always looking away from you. That misunderstanding was the seed of 30 years, and I watered it without ever meaning to because I never once thought to explain myself to him. Explaining myself was not a thing my family did. We showed people who we were by what we finished, not by what we said, and that language, which served me so well in uniform, would very nearly cost me my only brother. When I was 18, I told my family I was enlisting. My father set down his coffee and looked at me for a long moment, and then he nodded that nod, and I felt like I had already succeeded at something. My brother, who was 14, did not take it that way. He left the table. He thought I was choosing away from him, and in a sense that a 14-year-old could not have named, he was not entirely wrong. But my father found me on the porch that night and said the thing that would become the spine of my life. "The Navy doesn't need loud," he told me. "It needs people who stay at the console when it gets hard." I have stayed at a lot of consoles since then. I have stayed at consoles when everything in me wanted to run. And every single time, some part of me was still that girl on the porch, trying to earn one more nod from a man who measured people by whether they finished the job. I enlisted as an intelligence specialist. It was not glamorous work, and that suited me. I learned the part of the Navy that nobody makes movies about, The watch floor at 3 a.m, the screens, the slow, careful assembly of a picture out of 1,000 small pieces. I learned that the person who quietly gets it right at the worst hour of the night is worth more than the person who is impressive in daylight. I was good at the worst hour of the night. I was good at being the calm voice on a bad line. I discovered that when other people got loud under pressure, I got quiet. And that the quiet was not fear, it was focus. The same focus my father had drilled into me over a folded tide chart. 6 years in, the Navy sent me to a commissioning program, and I traded my enlisted rank for an officer's commission and a whole new set of people who would look at me and decide, on sight, that the quiet woman in the corner was staff and not command. I never minded. That is the thing I need you to understand before I tell you what happened, because otherwise the rest of the story will not land. For most of my career, being underestimated felt like a coat I had been handed as a child and simply never taken off. People looked at me and saw someone junior, someone administrative, someone who had wandered into the important room by accident. And I let them, because the work always spoke for me eventually. The truth always made the call. I built an entire life on the faith that if I stayed steady and did the job, I would never have to announce myself, because the job would announce me. That faith carried me from a coastal clapboard house all the way to a rank I never let myself dream about out loud. And then one night, at 0200 hours, on a floor I commanded, it very nearly failed me completely. The years after my commission compressed the way careers do when you are always looking at the next problem instead of the last promotion, lieutenant junior grade, lieutenant, lieutenant commander. Each rank arrived in a room nobody would ever hear about, earned in the slow grind of getting hard things right. I noticed a pattern as I climbed, and the pattern was almost funny. The higher I rose, the more certain people were that I could not be who I was. A commander does not look like that. Their faces said, a senior officer is not that quiet, that plain, that easy to walk past. I could give you 100 examples, but a few will do. There was the colonel at a joint briefing who spoke to every man at the table and then turned to me and asked if I would mind taking notes. I took the notes. Then I gave the assessment that reorganized his entire operation, and I watched him spend the rest of the hour unable to look directly at me. There was the contractor at a secure facility who assumed I was the scheduler and asked me to fetch the real decision-maker. I told him the real decision-maker would be with him shortly, and then I sat down across from him and made the decision. There was the young aide who tried to stop me at a door because my badge, in his mind, did not match my face. Each time I let the work sort it out. Each time I watched the recalibration happen in real time, the little widening of the eyes, the sudden shift in posture, the ma'am that arrived 3 beats too late. It stopped bothering me somewhere around my 15th year. I told myself it was armor. I told myself that being invisible until the moment I chose not to be was a tactical advantage. I believed that for a very long time. There was one thing the armor never covered. In the autumn of 2015, my father died while I was deployed. I was running an intelligence cell on an operation I could not step away from. Not for a day, not for an hour. The math of it was brutal and simple. If I left, people I was responsible for became less safe. There was no version of leaving that did not put a name I knew at greater risk, and my father, of all people, would have been ashamed of me if I had chosen my own grief over their safety. So I stayed at the console. The night they buried my father on the other side of the world, I authorized a strike, and I did my job with a steadiness that would have made him proud and that I have never entirely forgiven myself for. My brother called me on a delayed line 2 days later. His voice came across the distance, flat and exhausted. He asked where you were, my brother said, meaning our father at the end, meaning where was I when the man who raised us needed his children in one room? I didn't have an answer that made it okay, Leland said when Dad asked. I did not have one either. I have carried that silence for over 10 years. It sat between my brother and me like a third person at every holiday we did not spend together, and I never told him what that night had actually cost me, because telling him felt like asking to be forgiven, and I did not believe I had earned it. I let him think I had simply not come. It was easier to be the sister who did not care than the sister who cared so much. She cried in a supply closet at the far end of the world with a headset still around her neck. By the time this story reaches its real night, I had one more person who mattered in it, and her name is Ramona Ellison. Ramona was my command master chief, the senior enlisted advisor on my task force, and she had been my friend for longer than either of us admitted out loud. We had come up together, more or less, crossing paths at 3 commands over 25 years, and somewhere along the way she had become the one person in uniform who could tell me I was wrong and know I would thank her for it. Ramona had spent 30 years watching good officers get judged by the cut of their profile and the volume of their voice, and she had run out of patience for it about a decade before I did. In the days before that night, she told me a truth I did not want to hear. "Your special warfare cell has grown a swagger problem," she said. We were walking the passageway outside the operations floor, and she kept her voice low the way you do when the thing you are saying is real. "That captain of yours runs his floor like it belongs to him and not to you." I told her every command has a personality. She stopped walking. "A personality's fine, ma'am," she said, "until it decides who is allowed to exist in a room." I told her I would keep an eye on it. She gave me a look that said keeping an eye on it was not the same as doing something about it, and she was right, and I did not want her to be right, so I changed the subject. That is a thing I am not proud of. I saw the storm on the horizon, and I decided I was too busy to read the chart. I was scheduled to fly in from a classified interagency session and go straight to the watch floor for a time-sensitive operation. Ramona offered to meet me at the door with my flag credentials displayed and a fresh uniform pressed and waiting. I waved her off. I said I would come as I was, tired and plain and in my travel clothes, and step onto the floor and get to work, the way I always had. She looked at me the way she looked at a plan she did not like, but could not overrule. "Ma'am," she said, "that floor doesn't know your face. Only your title. Wear the title where they can see it." I had spent my whole career being right without being seen, and I thought that was a strength. I told her I would be fine. I did not listen. That small decision, the decision to trust that the work would speak for me one more time, is the reason this story exists. If I had listened to Ramona Ellison, there would be nothing to tell you. But I have learned that the stories worth telling almost always start with the moment you ignored the person who knew better. The floor at 0200 hours is its own country. The overhead lights are dimmed to save the eyes of people who have to read screens for 12 hours at a stretch. The room glows blue and amber from the banks of monitors, and there is a particular quality to the quiet. A coiled quiet, because everyone in that room knows that the night is holding its breath. That night, it was holding its breath for one thing. A strike package was in position offshore, waiting, and the entire operation was pending a single authorization. My authorization. I was the task force commander. The go order was mine to give, and until I gave it, several hundred people were suspended in the worst kind of waiting, the kind where every extra minute increases the risk to everyone involved. I came off the aircraft and onto the floor without stopping to change or to fix myself. I was in dark travel clothes, a plain jacket, my hair pulled back, my credentials clipped to my waistband and turned inward the way they had ridden through 3 airports. I did not think about any of that. I thought about the strike package and the window closing and the console. I crossed the floor toward the command station out of 30 years of pure habit, the way you walk into your own kitchen in the dark, and I began to read the picture off the main screen. I could see the geometry of the thing already, the timing, the pieces that had to move in the right order, and my mind was 3 steps into the problem before my body had finished crossing the room. That is when Captain Garrett Voss crossed the floor toward me. Garrett Voss was 48 years old, a Navy captain and a SEAL, and he commanded the special warfare cell that Ramona had warned me about. He was exactly what a lifetime of hard training builds when it is never balanced by humility. He was broad and certain, and used to being the most dangerous man in any room, and on that floor, in those minutes, he had decided that an unfamiliar woman standing at the command console was a problem to be removed. He did not know my face. He knew only that he had not personally cleared me to be there. And to a man who ran the floor like it belonged to him, that was the same as trespassing. I have thought a great deal about the speed of his decision. It took him less than 2 seconds to look at a tired woman in plain clothes and conclude that she could not possibly matter. 2 seconds. That is how long it takes some people to erase you. He did not ask who I was. He reached out and took my arm above the elbow, his grip firm enough to turn me, and he said the words I will hear for the rest of my life. "This floor is for operators," said Captain Voss, "not sightseers. Get out of my sight." The room went still. Not quiet, exactly, because the machines never stop, but the human sound of it stopped all at once, the way a held breath stops. I felt the eyes come up from the consoles. Near the center of the floor, a young officer half rose from his station. His name was Owen Trask, a lieutenant junior grade, 26 years old, and he had the look of a man who had just watched a mistake happen at a speed he could not catch. His mouth was already open. Something in him knew, before the phones knew, that the floor was tilting under all of them. I did not pull away. I have thought a great deal about why not, and the honest answer is that pulling away would have been a performance, and I do not perform. I looked at the hand on my arm, and then I looked at the captain's face, and I said only that he should let go of my arm. My voice was level. It is always level. He did not let go, not yet. He told me that security would walk me out and that he did not have time to babysit lost analysts on the busiest night of the quarter. His voice had the easy contempt of a man who had never once been wrong about who mattered in a room. I remember thinking, with a strange detachment, that he genuinely believed he was doing his job. That was almost the worst part. He was not being cruel for sport. He had simply decided the truth about me and closed the file. And then the first phone rang. It was the strike lead's secure line, and the watchstander who answered it went pale as he listened. "Sir," he said into the handset, and his eyes came straight to me. "They're asking for Admiral Falk's go order. He is asking, is the Admiral on the floor?" Before the watchstander finished the sentence, the Fleet Watch line rang at the next station, then the higher headquarters desk, then a phone across the room and another, until the floor filled with the sound of every secure line ringing at once, a wall of it, and every single caller was asking the same question. "Is Admiral Falk on the floor? We are holding for her order. Where is the Admiral?" The sound of it was extraordinary. I have stood in firefights that were quieter than that room full of ringing phones, because every one of those rings was a person up the chain asking for me by name, while a man held my arm and told me to disappear. Captain Voss still had my arm. Owen Trask said it out loud because someone had to, and because he was the kind of young officer who does the right thing a half-second before it is safe to. "Captain," he said, his voice carrying across the ringing. "That's the Admiral. That's who we're holding for." I have commanded a lot of difficult moments. I have never heard a room understand something so completely and so fast. Every phone in that room was ringing for me, while a man held my arm and told me to vanish, and I watched the knowledge move across Garrett Voss's face, like a shadow crossing water. First confusion, then the beginning of doubt, then the full, cold arrival of it. The understanding that the woman he had just decided did not belong was the one person the entire night had been waiting for. He let go of my arm as if it had become hot. I reached down, unclipped my credentials, and turned them outward, and the single star caught the amber light. I did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say that the phones were not already saying. I stepped past him to the console, picked up the strike lead's line myself, and I went to work. The next 90 minutes belonged entirely to the operation, and I gave them everything, because that is what the console is for. I brought the strike package in, made the calls that had to be made in the order they had to be made, and I did it without a tremor in my voice, because a tremor on that line costs lives, and I have never once let mine be heard. I read the picture, I gave the order, I watched the pieces move, and I adjusted when the world did what the world always does and refused to follow the plan exactly. No one mentioned the captain. The work does not have room for grievance while it is happening. The work carried all of us, him included, and by the time the all clear came across the net and the coiled quiet of the room finally uncoiled into the loose, exhausted relief of a night that ended right, I had almost convinced myself that the thing at the beginning had not happened. It had happened. I found that out on the walk to the coffee mess. Ramona caught up with me in the passageway outside the floor, and for exactly one sentence I let the mask come down, because Ramona had earned the right to see the person underneath it. I had commanded the entire night without a tremor, and it was the short walk to the coffee mess that made my hands shake. I looked down at them, my own hands, and watched them betray me, and I could not entirely make them stop. Ramona saw it. Of course she saw it. She sees everything. She looked at my arm, where a bruise was already coming up in the shape of a grip, 4 small marks where his fingers had been, and her jaw set in a way I had learned to respect over the years. "You ran a flawless operation with a bruise coming up on your arm," she said quietly. "Nobody out there knows that but me. That's the part that makes me angry, ma'am. The part where you did the hardest job in the building perfectly, and the record will show a clean night and it will never show what it cost you to walk to that console. I told her the truth because she was the only person I could tell it to. It was not the insult that stayed with me, I said. It was how ordinary it felt. Like the coat I had been handed my whole life and never asked for. 30 years of rooms deciding on sight that I could not be who I was. And I had told myself every time that it was armor, that it was an advantage, that I did not mind. And I stood in that passageway at 4 a.m. with my hands shaking and understood that I had been lying to myself for 30 years. I did mind. I had always minded. I had just gotten very good at not letting anyone see it, including me. Ramona didn't try to fix it. That is one of the great mercies of a real friend. She just stood with me in the passageway until my hands were mine again. And then she walked me to coffee, like nothing had happened, because sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is refuse to make a scene out of your worst moment. I sat with my coffee in the mess, and I did the thing I always do when something knocks me sideways, which is to take it apart and look at the pieces. I was not angry at Garrett Voss, not exactly, and that surprised me. What I felt was closer to recognition. I had met 100 versions of him over 30 years, the man who is so sure of his own importance that other people become scenery. And I knew that his certainty was not really about me at all. He had looked at a tired woman in plain clothes and seen the least important person in the room, because that was the only way his particular kind of confidence knew how to organize a room, by deciding quickly who counted and who did not. The tragedy of men like that is not that they are cruel. Most of them are not. The tragedy is that they are so busy being certain that they never learn to be curious. And a man who cannot be curious about the quiet person at the edge of the room will eventually, inevitably grab the wrong arm. I finished my coffee and I understood that the bruise coming up under my sleeve was not really a wound Voss had given me. It was the whole 30 years, all of it, finally showing up on my skin where I could no longer pretend it had not touched me. And somewhere in that understanding, sitting alone in a fluorescent mess at 4 a.m, I made the first quiet decision that would shape everything that came after, which was that I would not spend my anger cheaply, and I would not waste this. If the thing was going to cost me a bruise and a shaking hand and 30 years of pretending, then it was going to buy something real on the way out. Garrett Voss did not sleep that night either, though for a very different reason. I learned the shape of it later, the way you learn these things, in pieces, from people who were there. He went back to his own space, and he replayed it, the arm, the words, the phones. A junior chief found him there and told him, carefully, that the whole cell was already talking about it, that the story was moving through the task force faster than any operational report ever did. And somewhere in those small hours, Captain Voss stopped being a man who had insulted a stranger and became a man who understood that he had laid hands on his own task force commander in front of the entire watch. Those are two very different weights. The first one you can shrug off, the second one does not come off. I am told he sat with his head in his hands for a long time. I take no pleasure in that image, though I understand why you might expect me to. We will get to why I do not. Word of the incident reached above me before I had decided what to do about it, which is how these things always go. Vice Admiral Gordon Pierce was my superior, 61 years old, a man who had spent 40 years in the Navy and had very little patience left for people who wasted it. He called me in the following afternoon and he had already been briefed, and he was ready to help me end Garrett Voss's career before dinner. Say the word, Pierce told me, and he's relieved by lunch tomorrow. Pierce was not being dramatic. He meant it precisely. A flag officer had been physically removed from her own command console by a subordinate in front of the watch. In the ledger of the Navy, that is nearly unsurvivable for the subordinate, and Pierce was offering me the clean, total, institutionally sanctioned destruction of the man who had done it. Most officers in my chair would have taken it. Some would have enjoyed taking it. He slid the option across the desk to me like a loaded thing, and he watched my face, because Gordon Pierce had known me a long time, and he was genuinely curious what I would do with it. I told him no. Pierce leaned back and looked at me the way people look at me when I do the thing they did not expect, which happens more than you would think. Most officers in your chair would want him made an example. He said, "You're telling me you don't." I told him I did not want Garrett Voss made an example. I wanted him made better, and those are not the same thing, and the second one is much harder. I told Pierce that if I relieved Voss by lunch, I would feel powerful for an afternoon, and the floor would learn exactly the wrong lesson, which is that the way you survive on this task force is by never getting caught. I did not have a floor problem named Garrett Voss. I had a floor culture that had taught a talented man he could decide who was allowed to exist in a room, and firing him would leave the culture perfectly intact and simply remove the one person the whole thing had finally become visible through. "Fire him," I said, "and I fix nothing. I just get to feel like I did." Pierce was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded slowly, and I saw that he understood, and more than that, I saw that he approved. I did not let it go. I want to be clear about that because quiet is not the same as weak, and dignity is not the same as surrender. I convened a formal counseling. I put the incident in his record in plain, permanent language, no euphemism, no softening. I directed Captain Voss to personally lead a floor conduct review across the entire special warfare cell, the very swagger problem Ramona had flagged, now his own responsibility to dismantle. And I took away the thing he valued most, which was the unquestioned run of the floor. He would work under scrutiny now, and he would know it, and the whole cell would know it. There is a kind of accountability that is louder than a firing and lasts longer, and it is the accountability of having to stay and fix the thing you broke in front of the people who watched you break it. Then I did the part that mattered most. I met him myself, alone except for Ramona, and I did not shout. I have never once needed to shout. I laid it out for him like a chart on a kitchen table, the arm, the words, the watch that saw it, the fact that he had decided in one single second that a quiet woman in travel clothes could not possibly belong at her own command console, and that he had been so certain of it that he put his hands on her. He started to apologize, the fast, smooth apology of a man used to talking his way back from the edge, and I stopped him. I told him I did not want the easy apology. I told him the easy apology was for him, not for me, and that what I wanted was for the habit underneath it to change. "An apology closes a moment," I said. "I am not interested in closing the moment. I am interested in the next quiet person who walks onto that floor." He looked at me then, like a man being handed something heavier than punishment, which is exactly what it was. Punishment ends. What I was handing him did not. He sat with that. To his credit, he did not argue. He did not perform contrition either, which I noticed and quietly respected. He said one thing before he left the room. "You could have ended me," he said. "I know what I did." He was not asking me why I hadn't. He was just marking it the way an honest man marks a debt. I told him I did not want him to owe me. I wanted him to owe the floor. Then I let him go. The consequences reorganized Garrett Voss's world without the armor of his reputation, and that is where the real work started, because it is easy to be sorry and hard to be different. He began the floor conduct review I had assigned him, and at first he ran it exactly the way you would expect, like a box to be checked and reported complete. He held the sessions, he took the notes, he produced the paperwork, and then something happened that the assignment made possible. A young enlisted watchstander, protected by the fact that the review existed and that speaking up was now sanctioned, told Captain Voss the truth to his face. The cell had not respected him, the sailor said. The cell had feared him. "There is a difference," the young man said, "and everyone here knows it but you." The quiet Voss had always taken for respect had been people waiting for him to leave the room. I am told that landed harder than the counseling in his record ever could have, because a mark in a file is an abstraction, and a 19-year-old telling you that your people were afraid of you is not. I am told Voss did not defend himself. He thanked the sailor, and then he went back and he read every note from every session again, this time looking for the thing he had trained himself for years not to see. Voss did something after that which told me he might actually change. He sought out Owen Trask, the lieutenant junior grade who had named the truth on the floor that night, the young officer whose plain words had cut through the ringing. A smaller man would have resented Trask forever for it, would have found a way to make his life quietly difficult, would have remembered him as the one who said it out loud. Voss thanked him. "I ran that floor for 6 years, Voss told him, and I thought the quiet meant respect. It meant they were waiting for me to leave. A captain learning something from a lieutenant is not a natural act. It goes against every current in the water. But it is the truest sign I know that a person is done defending who they were and has started building who they will be. Trask told me about it weeks later. still a little astonished, and I told him that he had done something that night that most officers twice his age could not do, and that I had noticed, and that I would keep noticing. Ramona kept me briefed on all of it, and she watched me carefully while she did, because Ramona knows me, and she knew the temptation. It would have been so easy to enjoy it. It would have been so easy to savor the sight of a man who told me to disappear now, shrinking under the weight of his own floor. I did not let myself, and it was not because I am a saint. It is because I have seen what savoring does to people. I have watched it hollow out good officers and call the emptiness justice. I have seen commanders who won their fight and lost themselves in the winning, who got the thing they wanted and became someone their younger self would not have recognized. I could have savored watching him fall, I told Ramona one evening. I've seen what savoring does. It hollows you out and puts a medal on it. She nodded, because she had seen it too, and neither of us wanted it for me. You keep your hands clean, ma'am, she said, and not because you're soft, because you've got a long way left to walk and you don't want to be carrying that. The test came, as tests do, in the form of another time-sensitive operation. Weeks later, another night, another strike package, and this time Garrett Voss was on the floor under my command from the first minute. I watched him. I would be lying if I said I did not watch him closely. Old habits do not vanish because a man decides they should, and I wanted to see what he did when the pressure came back and the room got tight. He did the job right. He deferred correctly. He ran his cell clean. He did not once try to own the room. When a junior watchstander offered a piece of the picture, Voss listened instead of talking over her, and I saw him make himself do it, which is different from doing it naturally, and in some ways more impressive. And when it was over and the all-clear came across the net, he addressed me properly by rank in front of the watch, the first time he had done so, and he did it without ceremony, the way you say a thing you finally mean. The Admiral's floor is secure, he said, and the words were ordinary, and the room was not fooled about how ordinary they were. A room always notices when a man stops performing and starts serving. I did not make anything of it. I only nodded, once, the way my father used to, and I saw him register it, and that was enough. I have found that the smallest acknowledgments are the ones that land if you have spent your whole career refusing to hand them out cheaply. There was a moment near the end of that second operation that told me more than any report could have. A petty officer, young, maybe a year out of her school, caught something on her screen that did not fit the picture. In the old days on that floor, she would have swallowed it, because raising your hand in front of the captain used to be a good way to get made small. She did not swallow it. She said it plainly into the room, and Voss turned to her and asked her to walk him through it, and she did, and she was right, and it mattered. I watched the whole thing from the command station, and I did not say a word. I did not need to. The floor had learned a new grammar, and the grammar was that a true thing spoken by a junior person is worth exactly as much as a true thing spoken by a senior one. That is the entire game. Everything else is decoration, and the man who had once decided in 2 seconds that a quiet woman could not matter was now the one drawing the truth out of the most junior sailor in the room and thanking her for it. I have seen a great many things in 30 years. I am not sure I have seen a cleaner proof that people can actually change, if the change is made to cost them something real, and then made worth their while to keep. The professional repair held on new terms, and around the same time, a second repair I had long since stopped hoping for cracked open. This one made of blood instead of rank. Voss brought me the completed floor conduct reform a few weeks on, not for credit, not with a flourish, but because it was finished and it was good. I read it. It was solid, genuinely solid, the work of a man who had stopped protecting himself and started paying attention. It named the problem honestly. It did not flatter the cell, and it did not flatter him. "This is good work, Captain," I told him. "Keep it going when I'm not watching. That's the whole test, and you know it." He knew it. That was the point at which I stopped watching him closely, which is its own kind of promotion, the kind you never get told about but always feel. And then my brother called me. Leland had heard the story secondhand, the way our family always heard about my life, from a Navy family friend 2 towns over. But this time the story was different, and it reached him differently. He had heard that his sister had run a major operation the same night that some captain had tried to throw her off her own floor and put his hands on her to do it. For the first time in 30 years, the abstraction of my career, the thing he had resented as a cold choice I made against the family, became a concrete image he could actually see. A room full of ringing phones, a hand on his sister's arm, his sister stepping past the hand to do a job that several hundred lives depended on. He called me, and his voice was not flat and exhausted the way it had been in 2015. It was something I had not heard from him in a very long time. It was pride, mixed up with grief, mixed up with an apology he did not yet know how to say. He started by asking if it was true, if a man had really grabbed me, and I told him it was. And there was a silence on the line that had a lot of years in it. Then he said quietly that he did not think he had ever once pictured what I actually did. He had pictured a desk. He had pictured me choosing paperwork over family. He had never pictured a floor at 2 a.m. with the lives of strangers waiting on my voice. I told him that was partly my fault, because I had never told him, because telling people what I did was not a thing I knew how to do. And then we finally talked about our father, about the funeral I missed, about the 10 years of silence I had let stand between us because breaking it felt like begging. I told him what I had never told anyone in the family, which was where I had actually been that night. I buried him from a watch floor, Leland, I said. I authorized a strike the night you all lowered him into the ground, and I did my job perfectly, and then I went to a supply closet and I did the crying where no one could see it. I never told you, because telling you felt like asking to be forgiven, and I didn't think I'd earned it. There was a long silence on the line, the good kind, the kind where something is actually changing instead of just ending. I spent 10 years thinking you didn't come home because you didn't care, my brother said finally. I never once thought it cost you more than it cost me. It was not forgiveness, not all at once, not the way it happens in the movies. It was one honest step onto a bridge we had both refused to build. We agreed to keep talking. I set the terms of it the same way I had set them with Voss, the only way I know how to set terms. Truth first, no performance. Earn it, do not announce it. We would not fix 30 years on one phone call, but we would stop pretending the 30 years had been nothing, and that, it turns out, is where all real repair begins. We talked more after that in the weeks that followed, short calls that got a little longer each time. He asked me questions he had never asked about the work, about what it was actually like to be the calm voice on a bad line, about whether I had been afraid. I told him the truth, which was that I had been afraid many times and had simply learned to keep the fear in a drawer until the job was done. He told me he had spent his whole life thinking I was fearless and resenting me for it, and that it was strange to learn at 50 that his sister had been scared the same as anyone and had just refused to let it drive. I told him our father had been the same way, that the quiet in that house had never been the absence of feeling, only the discipline of it, and that maybe we had both misread the same man in opposite directions. Leland was quiet for a while, and then he said that he thought our father would have been proud of both of us for finally figuring that out, and I had to put the phone against my shoulder for a second so he would not hear that it had landed. That is the thing about a wound you have carried for a decade. When it finally begins to close, you do not feel triumphant. You just feel how tired you have been. Time did what time does, which is to reorganize a life quietly while you're busy living it. The months that followed were not dramatic, and I have come to believe that not being dramatic is underrated. The task force floor changed in ways you could measure. Junior watchstanders spoke up now. People asked questions in front of senior officers without the little flinch that used to come first. The reports got more honest because honesty was no longer dangerous, and an operation runs better on honest reports than on comfortable ones. And the strangest turn of all, the one that still makes me smile, was that Garrett Voss became the fiercest defender of the culture he had once been the worst symptom of. Nobody gets judged on sight on my floor, I heard he told a new officer once. I learned that one the hard way, and I'm not going to watch anyone else learn it the way I did. The change outlived the punishment. That is the only way you ever know a change was real. Punishment can produce a quiet man for a month. Only a real change produces a different man for good. Vice Admiral Pierce called me in again, months later, and told me something that made me deeply uncomfortable. The way I had handled the incident, boundary instead of spectacle, correction instead of destruction, was being written up as a teaching case. You turned the worst night of your year into the reason this command is better, Pierce said. Most people can't do that with a whole career. I did not know what to do with the praise. I have never known what to do with praise. I told him I had only done the job, which is what my father would have said, and Pierce gave me a look that told me he did not entirely believe that was all it was, and he was right not to. I was uncomfortable being made an example of, even for doing something right, because the whole point of how I had handled it was that I did not want anyone made into an example, myself included. But I let it go. Some recognition you cannot refuse without making a bigger scene than the recognition itself, and my father did not raise a woman who makes scenes. My brother came out to the coast that autumn. We stood together at the end of the dock, where our father had taught me to read the tide, the fog sitting on the water exactly the way it had when I was 5 years old, and certain that if I paid enough attention, I could understand the whole machine of it. We did not fix everything standing there. You do not fix 30 years in an afternoon. But we stood in the same place, facing the same water, which we had not done in longer than I wanted to count. And for the first time in a decade, the silence between us was not the third person at the table. It was just quiet. The good kind, the kind my father would have approved of. Leland said after a while that he could see now why I loved it out here, the way the fog made everything patient. I told him our father used to say the water didn't care how loud you were. He laughed, because of course he had heard it too, 100 times, and we stood there together inside the same old sentence, finally on the same side of it. And late one night, at the end of a watch, alone on a floor that now ran on respect instead of fear, I let myself think about it all the way through. The arm on my elbow, the words, the phones ringing my name while a man told me to vanish, and the question that had been sitting in me for months finally came clear. What would it have cost me to answer that night with cruelty? I could have had Garrett Voss relieved by lunch. I could have made him small in front of the same watch that saw him make me small. I could have savored it. And I understood, standing there, that it would have cost me the only thing I have ever actually valued, which is the quiet certainty of being someone who does the work and does not need the crowd to see it. I kept waiting to feel triumphant about how it all turned out. What I felt instead was lighter. It turns out those are not the same thing either. Here is what the morning looks like now, on the other side of all of it. Coffee by the water with no operation pending and the phone, for once, silent. And I noticed something I had not felt in 30 years. I was not braced. The vigilance I had carried my whole career, the readiness for the next slight, the next room that would decide on sight that I did not belong, had loosened its grip on me without my permission. I sat there in the cold, clean air, and I was simply not waiting for the next hand on my arm. I cannot tell you what a strange and enormous gift that is until you have spent 3 decades without it. To sit in your own life and not be braced for it. To drink your coffee and not be scanning the room. My father gave me the tide charts and the sentence and the nod, but he could not give me that. That one I had to find on the far side of a night I would not wish on anyone. My brother and I cook now, badly. We made our father's terrible old fish recipe last month, the one he swore by and that no human being has ever actually enjoyed. Too much salt and a sauce that never once set. And we laughed until we could not breathe at how bad it was. And for the first time, the empty chair at the table felt like a memory instead of an accusation. That is the whole distance this story travels, if you want to measure it. From a hand on my arm to a kitchen full of my brother's laugh. From bracing to breathing. From a supply closet on the far side of the world to a coastal kitchen where the grief has finally softened into something we can hold together instead of apart. At the command, Owen Trask is thriving, the young officer who named the truth on the floor when it was still a half-second too early to be safe. Now works in a place that rewards exactly that. And he does not know it. But he is the reason I know the change is going to outlast me. When I am gone from that task force, and I will be gone from it soon enough, because we are all just tenants of the rooms we command, Trask will still be there, saying the true thing a half-second before it is safe. Garrett Voss runs a clean cell and guards the culture like a man who remembers what it cost to learn. And I have come to believe that the best thing I built that year was not the successful operation that the record shows. It was a room where the next quiet person who walks in, tired and plain and easy to overlook, gets the benefit of the doubt that I spent 30 years living without. I used to think the reward for doing the quiet work was that someday finally you would be seen. I was wrong about that, the way I was wrong about a lot of it. The real reward is that you stop needing to be. You do the work long enough and well enough, and the work becomes the only witness you require, and the opinions of the men who grab your arm in the dark stop being able to reach the place where you actually live. Garrett Voss can no longer touch that place, and neither could he on the worst night, though I did not know it yet. The phones knew it before I did. The phones were only telling the room what my father had told me on a porch when I was 18 years old. So let me leave you with the only thing I know for certain from a coastal dock and a watch floor and 30 years of rooms that guessed wrong about me. If someone ever decides, on sight, that you do not belong in the room you built, do not waste your voice arguing with them. Do not perform your worth for a person who is never going to see it anyway. Just do the work, stay at the console when it gets hard. Let the truth make the calls, in its own time, in its own way. It always knows your name. And one day, when you least expect it, you will hear every phone in the room start to ring, and you will understand that it was ringing for you the whole time, even when the only person who could not hear it was the man holding your arm. I am still at the console tonight, the way I have been my whole life. And the water is still out there in the dark, doing exactly what my father promised it would do. It does not care how loud anyone is. It only cares whether you did the work. I did the work. I am still doing it. And that, in the end, has been more than enough. If you've ever walked into a room you built and had someone decide in a single second that you didn't belong there, then you already know exactly how that night felt. I would love to hear how you handled it. Did you argue your worth, or did you let the truth make the call in its own time? And be honest with me. Would you have relieved that captain by lunch, or would you have done what I did and tried to make him better instead? Tell me in the comments. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while, because there is always room here for people who do the quiet work.